light up. Take a deep breath and suddenly the world feels different. Colors seem more vivid. Thoughts flow like water. The boundaries between yourself and everything around you begin to blur. For a moment, you feel connected to something bigger than yourself, something ancient, something sacred. But then doubt creeps in. Is this real spiritual experience or just chemical illusion? Does cannabis truly open doors to higher consciousness, or does it create false gateways that lead nowhere? These questions have haunted seekers for thousands of years, and the answers might surprise you. What if I told you that the relationship between cannabis and spirituality runs far deeper than modern culture suggests? That this plant has been used as a sacred tool by mystics, shamans, and spiritual masters for over 5,000 years? And that the question isn't whether cannabis affects your spiritual energy, but how, and whether you're prepared for what it might show you. The truth about cannabis and the soul has been hidden, suppressed, and misunderstood. Today, we're going to change that. Long before cannabis became a topic of political debate or medical research, it was considered a divine gift. In ancient Sanskrit texts, cannabis was known as ganja, literally meaning that which brings one closer to the divine. The Hindu god Shiva was said to have discovered cannabis growing on the mountainside and declared it sacred. He used it to reach states of cosmic consciousness. Archaeological evidence shows that cannabis was burned in ancient Chinese temples over 2,500 years ago. The smoke was believed to carry prayers directly to the heavens. In ancient Egypt, cannabis was found in the tomb of Ramesses II, prepared for his spiritual passage into the afterlife. The Scythians, fierce warriors of the Eurasian steppes, built elaborate tent structures, where they would burn cannabis and enter collective trance states. Greek historian Herodotus wrote that they would howl with joy as the sacred smoke filled their lungs and opened their minds to visions of other worlds. Even in Judeo-Christian traditions, there's evidence that cannabis played a sacred role. The Hebrew word kaneh, mentioned multiple times in the Old Testament as a key ingredient in holy anointing oil, has been translated by some scholars as cannabis. If true, this means that Moses, Aaron, and the priests of Israel were using cannabis-infused oil in their most sacred rituals. These weren't primitive people experimenting with random plants. These were sophisticated civilizations with deep understanding of consciousness, energy, and the nature of reality. They recognized cannabis as what the Vedic texts call a bridge between worlds, a plant that could temporarily dissolve the barriers between ordinary awareness and expanded consciousness. But here's what most people don't realize. These ancient cultures also understood the dangers. The same texts that praise cannabis as a sacred medicine also warn about its misuse. The ancient Ayurvedic physician Charaka wrote that cannabis could either open the mind to divine wisdom or close it in confusion, depending on how it was used. Modern research is finally catching up to what ancient cultures understood intuitively. Cannabis doesn't just affect your brain, it affects your entire energy system in ways that science is only beginning to understand. Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, the Israeli scientist who first isolated THC, discovered that humans have an entire biological system designed to interact with cannabis compounds. Called the endocannabinoid system, it consists of receptors throughout your brain, your nervous system, and organs. These receptors naturally produce compounds similar to those found in cannabis. This wasn't an accident of evolution. Your body was designed to interact with cannabinoids. The question is, why? Recent studies at Johns Hopkins University found that THC can trigger experiences remarkably similar to those reported in mystical traditions for centuries. Subjects described feelings of unity, transcendence of time and space, and encounters with what they perceived as divine presence. Brain scans showed decreased activity in the default mode network, the same brain region that becomes quiet during deep meditation and psychedelic experiences. The default mode network is what neuroscientists call the ego center of the brain. It's the voice in your head that constantly narrates your experience, judges situations, and maintains your sense of being separate. When this network quiets down, the barriers between self and universe begin to dissolve. Ancient yogis called this state samadhi, union with the divine. Buddhist texts describe it as the dissolution of the ego mind that shows your true nature. Cannabis, it seems, can temporarily create the same neurological conditions that mystics spend decades of meditation trying to achieve. Dr. Robin Carhart Harris, a leading psychedelic researcher, found that cannabis affects the brain's binding problem. How separate pieces of information get woven together into unified experience. Under the influence of cannabis, this binding becomes more fluid, more creative, more expansive. Thoughts that normally stay separate begin to connect. This is why cannabis often produces the aha moments that feel like sudden spiritual insight. But neuroscience only tells part of the story. To understand cannabis's true spiritual effects, we need to look beyond the brain, into the subtle energy systems that ancient traditions mapped thousands of years ago. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, consciousness flows through the body via an intricate system of energy centers called chakras. These spinning wheels of subtle energy govern everything from your basic survival instincts to your capacity for transcendent awareness. When cannabis enters your system, it doesn't just affect your brain chemistry, it affects the entire energetic architecture of your being. Cannabis seems to have a particular affinity for the higher chakras, those associated with expanded awareness, intuition, and spiritual connection. The heart chakra governs love. Many cannabis users report that the plant opens their heart, making them feel more loving, more connected to others, more aware of the underlying unity of all life. This isn't just sentiment. It's a real energetic opening that spiritual traditions have recognized for millennia. When cannabis activates the heart chakra, users often experience what mystics call cosmic love, a feeling of unconditional compassion that extends to all beings. This state can be so overwhelming that some people begin crying tears of joy. They feel the interconnectedness of all life for the first time. The throat chakra controls communication and self-expression. Cannabis often loosens the mental filters that normally limit what we're willing to say or explore. Conversations become deeper, more honest, more creative. Musicians and artists have long used cannabis to access new levels. The third eye chakra, located between the eyebrows, is the center of intuition, insight, and psychic perception. Cannabis can temporarily activate this energy center, leading to enhanced visual perception and increased pattern recognition. Many describe downloads of sudden understanding. Colors become more vivid because you're literally seeing with expanded awareness. But it's the crown chakra where cannabis creates its most intense spiritual effects. This is your connection point to universal consciousness, to what the mystics call the divine mind. When cannabis activates the crown chakra, users often report feeling connected to something vast and intelligent. They experience what can only be described as cosmic consciousness. Ancient Ayurvedic texts warned that opening these higher energy centers without proper preparation could be dangerous. They spoke of Kundalini syndrome, where spiritual energy rises too quickly through the chakra system, causing emotional instability, psychic overwhelm, and disconnection from ordinary reality. This is why traditional cultures always used cannabis in ceremonial contexts. With experienced guides, proper preparation, and clear intention. They understood that cannabis wasn't just a plant, it was a key that could open doors you might not be ready to walk through. To truly understand how cannabis affects your spiritual energy, you need to understand something that Western science has only recently begun to acknowledge. You have more than one body. Ancient healing traditions from around the world all describe human beings as multi-dimensional entities. Beyond your physical body, you have what the mystics call an energy body, or etheric body. This is a subtle electromagnetic field that interpenetrates and extends beyond your physical form. This energy body is where consciousness actually resides. Your brain is like a radio receiver, picking up signals. It translates them into thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. When you die, the physical body stops functioning, but the energy body carrying all your memories, patterns, and consciousness continues on. Cannabis works primarily through this energy body. When you smoke or ingest cannabis, you're not just affecting brain chemistry, you're altering the vibrational frequency of your entire subtle energy system. Kirlian photography, which captures the electromagnetic fields around living things, shows dramatic changes in the energy field surrounding plants and humans under the influence of cannabis. The energy field becomes more expansive, more radiant, more connected to surrounding energy fields. This is why cannabis often produces feelings of unity and interconnection. You're not just imagining that the boundaries between yourself and the world are dissolving. At an energetic level, they actually are. But here's the crucial point that most people miss. Your energy body has its own intelligence, its own natural rhythms, and its own capacity for expansion. When you regularly introduce cannabis into this system, you're essentially overriding its natural regulatory mechanisms. Think of it like this. Your energy body naturally expands during meditation, prayer, or creative work. It naturally contracts when you need to focus, make decisions, deal with practical matters, or integrate new experiences. This rhythm is essential for healthy spiritual development. Cannabis forces the energy body into expansion, regardless of whether that's what you need in the moment. This can prevent you from developing the natural capacity to regulate your own energy states. Dr. Valerie Hunt, a pioneering researcher in human energy fields, found that people who regularly used cannabis showed decreased ability to consciously control their energy states without external assistance. Their energy fields became less coherent. This doesn't happen overnight. But over months and years of regular use, the energy body can lose its natural elasticity, its ability to expand and contract according to inner wisdom. Here's what the wellness industry doesn't want you to know. Every tool for expanding consciousness can also be a tool for avoiding it. Cannabis is no exception. While cannabis can open doorways to higher awareness, it can also become a way to escape from the very growth that spiritual work demands. The ancient texts speak of this paradox in detail. The Vedic sage Patanjali, who wrote the foundational text on yoga philosophy, warned about becoming attached to the blissful states that spiritual practices can produce. He called these obstacles disguised as achievements. Cannabis presents a similar trap. The expanded awareness it provides can feel so pleasant, so insightful, so spiritually satisfying that you begin to mistake the experience for the goal. You start to believe that being high is the same as being awakened. But authentic spiritual growth requires what the Buddhists call noble suffering, the willingness to face your shadows and work through patterns. This develops the discipline that creates lasting change. Cannabis can temporarily dissolve these patterns, giving you a glimpse of what lies beyond them. But glimpses aren't the same as permanent change. The ancient Sufi mystic Rumi wrote about this, comparing substances to boats that can carry you across the river, but you must eventually step onto the shore. Cannabis might show you expanded states of consciousness, but it cannot do the work of integrating those states into everyday life. Modern addiction research supports this ancient wisdom. Dr. Gabor Mate found that all addictive behaviors represent attempts to avoid pain. When cannabis becomes a way to escape difficult emotions, challenging circumstances, or the hard work of personal growth, it stops being a spiritual medicine and becomes a spiritual bypass. The Tibetan Book of the Dead warns about mistaking temporary experiences for permanent realization. It describes how consciousness can become trapped in intermediate states, beautiful, blissful experiences that feel like enlightenment but are not. Cannabis can create similar intermediate states, offering genuine spiritual experience while simultaneously preventing the deeper work that leads to lasting awakening. Even worse, regular cannabis use can create what energy healers call etheric dependency. Your subtle energy system becomes reliant on external substances to access expanded states. Over time, your natural ability to reach higher consciousness through meditation, breathwork, or spiritual practice can become weakened. This doesn't mean cannabis is inherently harmful to spiritual development, but it does mean that, like any powerful tool, it must be used with wisdom, respect, and clear understanding of its dangers. The difference between sacred use and recreational escape isn't about how much you use, or how often. It's about consciousness, intention, and context. Sacred use recognizes cannabis as a teacher and a guide. It approaches the plant with respect, preparation, and clear intention. It uses the expanded states cannabis provides to gain insight, process emotions, connect with higher wisdom, or deepen spiritual practice. Recreational escape uses cannabis to avoid, numb, or distract from difficult experiences. It becomes a way to check out of life rather than check in more deeply, contracting consciousness into a comfortable bubble. The ancient mystery schools taught that all plant medicines were double-edged. They could either elevate consciousness or diminish it, depending on how they were used. The difference lay in the user's preparation. In traditional shamanic cultures, plant medicines were always used within careful ceremonial containers. There were specific rituals for preparation, experienced guides for safety, and structured processes for integrating the insights received. Most importantly, there were long periods between ceremonies, months or even years, allowing time for deep integration. Modern recreational use typically lacks all of these safeguards. Cannabis is used casually and frequently, often as a way to escape from rather than engage with the challenges of conscious living. The results speak for themselves. Traditional ceremonial use typically led to increased wisdom, emotional healing, and spiritual development. Modern recreational use often leads to dependence, decreased motivation, and spiritual stagnation. This doesn't mean all recreational use is harmful or that all medicinal use is beneficial. It does mean your approach matters, how you approach cannabis. Your mindset, your intention, your level of consciousness largely determines what kind of effects it will have on your spiritual development. Can a substance truly expand consciousness, or does it only create the illusion of expansion? This debate has raged for decades in spiritual circles. Traditional religious authorities often argue that authentic spiritual experience must be earned through discipline. They see substance-induced spiritual experiences as false, shallow, or even dangerous. Psychedelic researchers and consciousness explorers counter that these substances can provide genuine glimpses of expanded awareness, offering valuable insights. These experiences can catalyze authentic spiritual growth. The truth, as usual, is more nuanced than either extreme position suggests. Consciousness itself appears to be fundamental to the universe, not something produced by brains. Physicists like Max Planck and David Chalmers have argued that consciousness might be a basic property of reality, like energy or matter. If consciousness is fundamental, substances don't create expanded awareness. They temporarily remove the filters that normally limit your access to consciousness that's already there. Think of it like this. Your ordinary waking consciousness is like looking at the sky through a small window. Cannabis temporarily makes the window bigger, allowing you to see more of what was always present. The expanded view is real, but it's temporary. When the substance wears off, the window shrinks. This explains why cannabis experiences can feel so authentic, so meaningful, so genuinely spiritual, because you are accessing real expanded states of consciousness. But it also explains why these experiences don't automatically translate into lasting wisdom. The challenge is learning to expand your window naturally through practices like meditation, breathwork, contemplation, and service. This process is slower and requires more effort, but it creates permanent changes. Dr. Stanislav Grof found that while substances could provide authentic spiritual experiences, the insights gained only became permanently integrated through subsequent inner work, therapy, and spiritual practice. Cannabis can show you the territory, but you still have to walk the path. One of the most controversial questions in contemporary spirituality is whether cannabis enhances or hinders meditation practice. The answer shows fundamental truths about both. Traditional meditation teaches you to work with your mind as it is anxious thoughts, physical discomfort, emotional turbulence, and all. The goal isn't to achieve particular states, but to develop equanimity. The ability to remain peaceful and aware regardless of what's arising in your experience. Cannabis seems to offer a shortcut. It can quickly quiet mental chatter and dissolve emotional tension. It creates the kind of peaceful, expanded awareness that meditation teachers describe. Many practitioners report that cannabis helps them access deeper states of meditation more easily. But meditation masters have warned about spiritual bypassing. The Zen teacher Brad Warner puts it bluntly, "If you need to get high to meditate, you're not really learning to meditate, you're learning to get high." The concern isn't that cannabis-enhanced meditation is invalid or useless. The concern is that it can prevent you from developing the mental skills that meditation is designed to build: concentration and mindfulness, also emotional regulation, and the ability to find peace within chaos. Ram Dass, who had extensive experience with both psychedelics and meditation, described the relationship this way: "Psychedelics can show you the goal, but they can't walk the path for you. Eventually, you have to learn to get there on your own." Research supports this perspective. Studies on long-term meditators show increased gray matter density in brain regions. These are permanent structural changes that result from the repeated effort of training the mind. Cannabis-enhanced meditation, while it can produce beautiful states of consciousness, doesn't appear to create the same lasting neurological changes. The brain states achieved through cannabis are temporary and externally induced, rather than developed through the gradual strengthening of attention and awareness. This doesn't mean cannabis and meditation are incompatible. Many serious practitioners use cannabis occasionally as a way to refresh their practice, gain new perspectives, or work through particular obstacles. The key is maintaining clear boundaries using cannabis to support practice. Some traditions have found creative ways to work with this dynamic. Certain schools of Tantric Buddhism incorporate moderate amounts of cannabis into specific ceremonial practices, but always within the context of years of traditional training. The substance serves as a temporary enhancement to already developed skills, not a substitute for the basic work of mental training.